what I thought we could talk about today is, well, long story short, I actually didn't decide what I was going to do this video about. Still haven't. I was thinking, okay, let's pick a landing spot. I was thinking let's talk about why you or me still care what men think of us, even if you might even be gay. For those who don't know, if you're new here, I came out as a lesbian a couple months ago. I kind of realized it in the fall. And to be honest, I knew when I was 16. For some reason, whether it's because of the convenience of heterosexuality or, you know, what's available to you at the moment, like, oh, this guy likes me, I should probably go out with him, or like that kind of thing, or just feeling like that's what you're supposed to do. And you also think that when you're doing that, that's how it's supposed to feel. You know what I mean? Like, for me, dating men feels tolerable. Dating women is like, oh my god, I head over heels want to do that. You know what I mean? And I think there's this kind of misconception that if you are gay, that you are like automatically repulsed by the opposite gender. But I talked about this in another video, in my signs that you might be a lesbian video, so I'm not going to go into that here. It can be confusing, and I've talked to a lot of lesbians about this, where sometimes even after you come out, even after you've realized who you are, you still care what men think. And this is also true for people who are not gay, but who don't want to care what men think of them, but still do. And so I thought let's just break that down a little bit, like why we feel that way, and then also what we can do about it. And to be honest, I don't have it all figured out. Obviously, I'm only 20, so I don't have it all figured out, but I think even just hearing other people talk about it has been very huge for me. So hopefully me talking about it is helpful to you. Here's a couple things I noticed after coming out. One of them is you kind of realize who your real guy friends are, because like people who just wanted to have sex with you or date you or whatever just completely like stop talking to you, or they like immediately unfollow you after you come out. And it's like, whoa, like, geez, that's kind of feels awful. But it also shows you who the real friends are, because they're people who are still your friends, still talking to you, even knowing that they do not have a chance with you. Which, if you're a girl, you know that this is kind of rare for friendships with men sometimes. And I would say the reverse might be true too. I don't know. Because every time I make a statement like about something girls feel about stuff men do, there's always men in the comments being like, well, girls can do the same. And it's like, yeah, and this isn't a video about that. Like, I don't know why people think that if you don't mention like every single like viewpoint or all the nuanced layers of something, that you're automatically intentionally leaving them out. And it's like, that's not how anything works. But something I will say, and that I've talked about to a lot of lesbians, is that sometimes we still care about looking good for men, or sometimes we find ourselves still caring what a man thinks of us, and we're like, what is the deal? Because it's not quite attraction, but I still really care, and I still want to be seen as like cool or pretty or appealing. So let's talk about it. Because even if you're not gay, you've probably dealt with this same thing, no matter how much unlearning you've done. And I'm gonna say it, like, even though I've stopped wearing makeup, even though I've like gone back to my natural hair color and gained weight and whatever, even though I've done all those things for me, and because it makes me happy and doesn't leave me in a state where I'm constantly putting a mask on, like of makeup or hiding behind something, even though I'm fully myself now and did that for me and that feels so good, sometimes we still care. Sometimes we still really want someone to see us as cool. And I think when you grow up in this society, it's really easy to confuse feelings about someone. I might really care what a guy thinks of me or really want him to see me as cool, and it's not because I want to date him or anything, but maybe in the past I felt that way and part of me still feels that way. Or maybe you see an ex move on with someone else and you're like, even though I'm gay and completely not on the like not even would want to date this person again, part of you might still feel a little like, oh, when you find out someone moved on. And I think one of the best things that we can do is just like accept that sometimes that's gonna happen, because I think it can easily lead to feelings of like being a fraud, or being like, well, I must not really love myself if I care what a guy thinks, or I must not really be gay if I want this guy to see me as cool or funny or whatever. And so I just want to talk about why you might still care, even if logically you don't, but part of you does still care. So you're like, what's going on? Okay, something I want to say is that like we have been conditioned, if you're a woman, to really rely on what men think of us, because that's the kind of thing that can get you in the room or not. You know, if you're looking for like career opportunities or someone to say like your writing is good or your work is good. So I'm gonna make an example. So say you work at a company and the head of that company, as is most often the case, is a man. You're gonna need his approval if you want to get anywhere into the company. If you just want to start as an intern or whatever, you need to come off as someone who is appealing to men. And this applies to like genuinely almost every career field ever. It tends to be that men are at the top, and this is how it's been for years and years and years and years. Whether men actually have a superior position to us, like they have a career that's making them more money, or when you think about like the traditional view of marriage, where let's say we're talking about sometime in the 20th century and like literally any time before that, if you as a woman want to be able to have a good life and you want to be able to be provided for and have safety and have a place to live, you need a guy to like you enough to marry you and provide those things for you. And I think even though a lot of people culturally have moved on from that kind of view of it, I think it makes a lot of sense that we might still internalize that kind of stuff, especially because it is still true in a lot of ways, because women don't make as much money as men, and that goes even more so for women of color. So if you want to have a good life or stable life or be financially comfortable, you might still need a man to kind of give you that, even if it's like, well, it shouldn't be that way. Regardless of if you want it to be that way or if that goes with what you believe or not, it's still objectively true in a lot of cases. And so I think wanting men's approval, in addition to like the constant message that like you should be pretty for men, you should wear certain clothes because that's what men like, you should have this body type because men are into curves or because men are into, you know, we get all these messages about how we can best please men. Like there are entire magazines about that, like Cosmopolitan, which obviously as the culture changes, those ideas are changing, but they've been in place for literally centuries and centuries and centuries. So it's not like in the past 20 years where magazines are becoming a little more like less misogynistic. Like it's not like in that time we can unlearn centuries of messaging and societal, like, what would we call it? Societal expectations. And like even when we think about sex, it's always like women should please men. And that's kind of where the conversation ends. You know what I mean? Like there's not really anyone talking about women. Okay, we're gonna move on from that. But basically, you know what I mean? Like we've had this messaging for so long that it makes sense that you might still have some internalized views of that, especially because when we think about the other women in our lives from older generations that weren't as evolved in terms of like seeing women as equal to men. And so you might be around an older sibling or an aunt or a mother or a grandmother or just women you work with who are older than you or whatever, who still have those ideas and haven't unlearned them, because newsflash, just because society is changing views doesn't mean all the people that existed before that suddenly unlearn what they were taught their whole lives. And so I just kind of wanted to like shine a light on the fact that you may logically not want to care what men think, you may logically not even be interested in men, and you might find yourself still caring about how men see you. And like it doesn't just go for careers or for like wanting to have a stable household when you grow up. It can also just be for feeling like you need to look pretty for men, or feeling extra self-conscious around men when you're not wearing makeup. And I'll say it, like sometimes even after I've come out, I still care sometimes about wanting to look pretty for men, and it sucks. And you think that like after you've made all this progress, after you like kind of unlearn all these things and come to accept yourself, that automatically you're above having those feelings of caring what a man thinks. But like, don't be so hard on yourself, because there's so many reasons why that messaging is so hard to unlearn. And just because you've unlearned certain parts of it, or just because you have the logical piece down where you're like, yeah, that's fucked up, doesn't mean that automatically you feel completely independent of those ideas. You know what I mean? Like you might still be affected by that messaging, and it sucks. It feels awful. And you're like, how am I not past this? This doesn't even go with what I believe. This doesn't even go with what I want. But you know what? It's so common. So don't be so hard on yourself, because I still struggle with it too. me, who has come out as gay, who doesn't want to date men, still cares sometimes. And I think it's also confusing because, I mean, going back to sexuality a little bit, and again, I talked about this in my Signs You Might Be a Lesbian video, but it's so easy to conflate feelings or like any positive feelings that you have towards a man as attraction or as wanting him to be attracted to you. And sometimes you even want a man to be attracted to you when you don't even like him and you would turn him down if he did ask you out. It doesn't have to make sense. But like, we're kind of taught that if we think a man is funny or if he's really nice to us or if we enjoy his company, we must want to date him. When really it's like, those can just be things that you like about a person. And no one's like, oh, you must really have a crush on a woman if you enjoy being friends with her. You know, like the messaging is always, if you like a man, you should date him. If you like a woman, you should be friends. And so I think it's super easy to conflate feelings of attraction and like platonic affection. And really there's so many kinds of attraction. There's aesthetic attraction, there's romantic, sexual, like platonic. There's so many different kinds, and I could do a whole video about that. But like, it's so easy to think that just because you enjoy being around a man, you must care what he thinks about you, or just because you care what he thinks about you, you must be into him. And really, I think we have all these notions that like, well, if this thing is true, then this thing must also be true. And it's like, no, not necessarily. So yeah, I just wanted to say, like, if this is something you struggle with, you're definitely not the only one. Even if you're a lesbian and you struggle with this, guess what? You're also not the only one. I've talked to so many people who feel the same way and who sometimes feel like a fraud or like they must not actually be gay because they care what this man thinks. But it's only this man and not any other man. Like, it's really hard to figure this stuff out, especially when you don't hear people talking about it. People don't automatically volunteer this information, and it makes sense because if you volunteer, sometimes I still care what men think. You're gonna have people who are like, oh, then you must not actually be gay, or like you must not be a lesbian because if you were, then you wouldn't care at all what men think and your existence would be entirely independent from men. And it's like, yeah, maybe ideally, but it doesn't just automatically go that way. And just because you realize something about yourself doesn't mean that like everything you've been taught automatically stops affecting you if it's been affecting you for your whole life up to this point. So I thought I would just talk about that super fast, and hopefully this video was helpful for you. I wasn't planning on filming today. I'm feeling kind of dookie today, to be honest. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about this because this is something that like so many people struggle with, and I've had conversations with lesbians about this and no one ever talks about it. And it makes sense. I already talked about that. But I think hearing this would have just made me feel so much less alone. And again, I said this in my video about Signs You Might Be a Lesbian, but you should also read The Lesbian Master Doc because I think that will also help you feel so much less alone and help you kind of figure out these feelings and if it's really attraction or if you just still have some internalized male gaze or whatever it is, you know what I mean? And again, I'm just gonna say this one more time because I know I already said it earlier, but just because I'm talking about this one thing that involves women does not mean that the same cannot also be true for men. Because for some reason, men in my comments are always like, well, this isn't true because this also happens to men. And it's like, nobody said it didn't. You're like inventing fake things to be mad at that no one ever said. And it's so interesting and so stupid. But anyway, so I'll just make that disclaimer. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it made you feel somewhat less alone. And I hope you have a good rest of your day after you watch this.